Good evening from Nairobi, Kenya. It's now 10 days into the conflict between Iran, Israel, and United States, a conflict that is rapidly reshaping the global security and fuel markets, and whose ripple effects could, if soon or not later, be felt from the Red Sea to the shorelines of Indian Ocean, that is here at home, East Africa. Dear viewer, dear listener, that will be our point of focus on this episode of The Big Picture. My name is Muige William, once again, holding the fort for the brilliant Tom Mukwana. But I'll not be doing this alone. We have the magnificent Justin Wanda.
Hi, everyone. I was waiting for like a whole rundown on also my qualifications.
Hi, Justin.
Hi.
Happy International Women's Day.
Ilipita, but thank you so much.
Yeah, but I still have to do that.
Should I like say it for the room also? Like, Happy International Women's Day to everyone watching.
Please do.
Yeah.
Please do. Thank you so much. How's your week? How's your weekend?
Bro, tuachane na hiyo story.
Imekuwa chaotic.
Yeah.
All right, Justin and I also, we are not alone. We have two brilliant guests who are going to help us dissect and also have this conversation about the conflict in the Middle East. And on my far left, I will introduce our first guest. That is Dr. Nicodemus Minde. He is an experienced social science academic researcher and analyst with experience in conducting research and analysis in the field of international relations, peace, conflict, and development consultancy. Next to him is Cuba Houghton, a Kenyan economist and a public finance professional who is passionate about universal achievement on human dignity. Gents, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
I think you guys are the most brilliant people to have on the show to dissect all these matters and also to bring the conversation closer home. But before we get to the conversation of the day, I just want us to do a recap of what really transpired over the weekend. First of all, the International Women's Day. How do you feel about it, even though you're men? Did you wish the women's in your life some good day? How was it?
It was good. I'd say I'm one of those guys who celebrates women every day. But yeah, I was able to wish the important women in my life.
Daktari?
Oh, for sure, it was a good weekend to celebrate the women in our lives and, of course, wish them well and to also acknowledge the efforts that have been made towards gender equality and, of course, our mothers, our sisters, our daughters who continue to scale the heights in education, science, in many other fields. So it was a good opportunity to also not just to, but also to reflect on where we have come from and the future ahead.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. To a sad development, the death toll is still rising. Close to 29 people have lost their lives over the weekend. This is following the torrential rains in the capital city. Where were you guys on Friday? If I could start with you, Justin.
I was supposed to go to a friend's show, but I wasn't feeling well, so I didn't. And then I just started seeing all the devastating stories. So I was calling up everyone I know, checking up on them, making sure that they're safe, which I was lucky most of the people I know were either sheltering somewhere or they were not caught up in any of the rain. But so many other people were in very, very dangerous situations.
Sure. Daktari, it's been decades of dealing with storm water and flooding in the country's capital. Yeah. What is the amicable solution to this?
Well, I think it's a question of governance, and maybe to also say on Friday I was caught up in this big rain coming from the university. From teaching. This is around 8, only for me to get at home at midday, but at midnight. So to answer your question, I think this is largely a question of governance. In 2024, we saw a similar situation, and the government, of course, promised to deal with this issue. The question of drainage is still a big problem in the city. The question of, but again, I was also listening somewhere. This is also maybe a projection of maybe citizens who do not really trust even what the government tells them in terms of, this mistrust that they have on the citizens, because probably there are warnings, but they were apprehensive or say, okay, this is what you've been told again and again. So this is largely, for me, I look at it as a question of governance, and it has to be dealt with once and for all with election of good leaders.
Yeah, let me bring in Cuba. You're an economist, and you have seen businesses affected in a very big way. People have lost property. I mean, is an assurance from the government coming up with committees, national disaster, and all sorts of things the government is doing. Is that a long-lasting solution to this?
Well, perhaps not. I think I approach it from probably a public finance perspective, which is that the state, as a result of the constitution and different laws that we have in this country, is supposed to guarantee certain rights and certain public services. And behind that, it's supposed to be putting resources behind those public services through public budgets, right? So for the counties that were affected, I guess the number one question of the citizens of those counties should be asking is, how much is my county spending on stormwater drainage, on sewage, right? Because the budget process is something that happens throughout the year, and there are these different opportunities for citizens to get involved, right? So one of the questions I've been asking myself is, am I involved enough in the affairs of my county to prioritize some of these issues, right? So you'll find that maybe when people attend public participation on the budget for the county, maybe drainage is not something that comes up, right? And so part of the question becomes, what is also my responsibility? That being said, one of the things that you notice is the contingency fund and some of these funds that are set up to deal with some of these disasters are actually some of the most underutilized, right? Like you rightly mentioned, there are many institutions that have been set up in Kenya, whether it's a committee or it's actual state entity that have been set up to actually deal with these and to prevent these from actually happening. Because some of this is climate change related, right? So you have roads that are not storm-proof, right? Or roads that actually are not built in a way that's accommodative of such amounts of rains. And so I believe there's a governance failure there. But the question also is, rightly as Daktari has put it, how aware are you of the different instruments that the state has actually put to avoid this, but also how involved are you in this service delivery? Yeah.
All right. I think it's a conversation we can dedicate a whole episode to discuss, because this has been an issue for quite a very long time. But what was your experience on Friday? Where were you? Where did the rain get?
I was at home, actually, luckily.
Lucky you.
But I was actually caught in a weird situation where my auntie's place was actually flooding. And so I wasn't able to go and help her because at the time we couldn't get transport. Luckily, in the morning it evaporated. I saw a tweet that said Nairobi's drainage system is evaporation. But luckily it had disappeared. But I remember just feeling a bit helpless in that situation.
Quite unfortunate. All right. Now, ladies, gents, we are going to shift gears and focus into the discussion of the day. Dear viewer, dear listener, you can send your questions, comments through our social media handles. They are all open. Please feel free to interact with us as we dissect this conversation. I want us to bring the conversation home in relation to our topic of the day, that is the conflict in the Middle East. And I want to start with you, Daktari, because you're a qualified person in terms of international relations. So my first question, and to open this discussion, will be for someone here in Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, Kampala, trying to understand this conflict. What is really at the heart of this whole tension between Iran, Israel, and America?
Well, I think it's complex, but maybe to sum it up, it's a geopolitical conflict. The Middle East has been very turbulent over the years, throughout the many decades, and we see this is a region that has is an interplay of diverse political, social, as well as religious foundations. So if I were to really say what really happened is that on a Saturday 10 days ago, we saw the United States together with Israel launching strikes and in Iran and killing the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini. And this came in the midst of the diplomatic talks that were being held between Iran and the United States, actually. And the contention has always been the issue of the nuclear which Iran have oftentimes said is based on is a peaceful nuclear program. But so we see what happened on Saturday became the start of this conflict that has now taken up a very, not just a geopolitical but also a regional complex, but also now it has now become an international issue because of the impact that it is having on markets, on oil prices and the like. So but this is also a historical conflict in the sense that Iran, the prospects of attacking Iran have been there almost for 30 years. You can recall in 2002, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was still making justifications that Iran has nuclear weapons, and it was almost on the brink of getting a bomb. And so this has been time coming. But of course, in 2015, we saw an agreement that was reached between Iran and what we call the Permanent Five plus Germany in a deal known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which again limited the enrichment of uranium to certain degrees, but also other concessions, including inspections by the IEA. So Iran was, had made a lot of concessions. But again, come in 2016, Donald Trump becomes president, he dismantles the deal, and we're back to square one. So you can see this has been a long time coming. Again, when we were speaking, it is also a complex conflict that is rooted in historical issues such as religion, faith, and it's quite complex as it is right now, but we'll continue to unpack it as it comes,
as it comes, but
as it evolves.
It begs the question: we have seen heavy shelling, sophisticated artillery in all these conflict. Why hasn't diplomacy worked?
Well, they say in diplomacy that war is the last resort of diplomacy, and war is also a failure of diplomacy. But again, we have to also be very categorical and analytical that in the midst of a diplomatic negotiation, which was being conducted by, the Omani, under the auspices of Oman, the Omani foreign minister, meeting with the Iranian foreign minister together with the American envoy, Steve Witkoff, it was also at the same time the United States was actually building up its ammunitions in the Gulf, which again was some form of an irony that almost like they were buying time. So to simply answer your question, I think this is a failure of diplomacy, and it's not just right now. It is a historical question of mistrust, especially coming from what we call the conceptual West, led by the United States of America. Yeah.
You have really done a good job to unpacking the whole history and even what is currently happening in Middle East. But I want to bring in Cuba Houghton. For a viewer watching, wherever he or she is watching this conversation from, let's say Kampala, Nairobi, or even Dar es Salaam, how relatable is it from the Middle East all the way to East Africa? Because Africa is often seen as a distant from these conflicts, you see? But in reality, how true is this assumption in terms of, our coffee, our tea, trade routes, our products that we ship and even take to the Middle East and even beyond? Yeah.
Thanks. I think one of the ways to think about this as an African citizen, whether you're in Kenya or you're in South Africa, is to think about the ways in which your country interacts with the world, right? And two primary ones would be trade, another one would be finance, right? So trade has to do with what is it that we send to the UAE, or the Middle East, and what it is that we import from there, right? And so that's, I would say, the area that is probably the most directly relatable, the area that is probably most likely to have an impact on your life, right? And this is also something that we saw, it's not the first time it's happening, something that we saw in 2023 when the Russia-Ukraine conflict kind of flared up.
Yeah.
We also saw this slightly with the 12-day war between the US and Iran as well, and Israel and Iran. And essentially what happens is that there's two sides. So there's the import and the export. So when you look at what it is that your country exports, you're talking about the goods made locally that are sold in those markets, right? Now, for Kenya, for example, the Middle East, that's Saudi Arabia, UAE, United Arab Emirates, Oman, Kuwait, are big export markets for some of our biggest exports. That's tea, cut flowers or horticulture, and meat, right? And so what will happen in the case that there's a war and these countries are not actually able to receive our goods, because part of the reason why the war is so important is because it's happening in this area called the Strait of Hormuz, which you've probably heard of on Twitter or somewhere, right? But basically, it's this 20 to 40 kilometer stretch of land of sea that actually a lot of trade with those countries happens or passes. It's a major trade route. And so a lot of freight, a lot of cargo passes through that region, especially oil, and we'll get to that. But essentially, if our goods cannot get there, it means that those export markets are no longer available to us. And so the people who produce within, so if you're a tea farmer or if you're a meat producer, right, you're the people who produce, who rear animals, your business is likely to suffer. There's another impact of this, which is that when we export less, or when foreign consumers do not consume as much of Kenyan products, it means they demand less Kenyan shillings, right? Which means then our currency becomes devalued or loses value relative to other currencies. And so the impact there might be that what we saw in 2023, where the US dollar appreciated significantly to the Kenyan shilling. But just as a caveat, our export markets to the UAE are not entirely massive, right? So I think the amount of tea that we export to Iran is about 5.6 billion, or 3% of our total tea exports. So if you were to lose that, it's 5.6 billion is a lot. Somebody's business, right?
Yeah.
But it's not entirely kind of the end game. Goat meat is about 4% to Iran. But the most important one that will probably, the most direct impact will probably be on energy prices or on fuel. Now, in the Kenyan consumption basket, right, what you'd call the cost of living, fuel accounts for about 12% of that, right? So when the price of fuel increases, that directly affects the cost of living for you. That's what you call the first round of effects. The second round of effects is an increase in the cost of fuel will actually increase the cost of transport. It will increase the cost of production. And most producers and most businesses will actually pass that cost on to you. And the reason why we're expecting to see a rise in the price of oil is because when the flow of oil is restricted out of the Strait of Hormuz, suddenly oil, one, becomes very scarce. So some of those countries like Kuwait has actually pulled down the flow of oil out of Kuwait, right? So whenever something gets scarce, it tends to increase in value. And so we've already seen the price of crude oil actually increase past $100, whereas 2 weeks ago it was at 70. And so that raises a challenge for Kenya in terms of production and also in terms of the cost of production, what we call cost push inflation. And so that's likely to increase.
Yeah.
A final point on that is that Kenya also re-exports petroleum, right? So we actually a source of petroleum to Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, among other landlocked countries. And so that also presents a challenge if we can't get as much fuel in the country to distribute, although I think we've been informed that we have reserves until April. Then it means that we also lose that export market. So that money that we are getting from those different countries as well.
Okay, before my colleagues poses a question, just over to you, Dr. Minde. It seems like Cuba is raising a lot of issues, and it seems like a lot is at stake, whereas this conflict is like hundreds of kilometers away. But here at home, a lot is at stake. What does this mean?
No, it's the globalized nature of our world right now, the interconnectedness, and of course, there's that intersection we call political economy, the intersection that political decisions have economic implications, and economic implications also have political implications. And Cuba here is very right in trying to analyze the economic dynamics. On why this has an impact here is as I've told you, the channels of the market channels, the communication channels, and of course the underlying issue is the oil is a very important resource globally, which is needed everywhere. Not all countries produce oil, and of course we know the Middle East is one of the biggest producers of oil in the world, if not the biggest. So you can understand why it has an impact not just in the Middle East, across Europe, the world, but also closer home here in Kenya.
Okay, fair enough.
So Cuba, you pointed out that all the oil prices are through the roof right now, but the Energy Ministry had said very frankly that most of the fuel that they already have should last us till April, but also those fuel prices will not increase. How realistic is this? And are Kenyans vulnerable to possible cost increases even after these kinds of reassurances?
Anything is possible, but I'd like to trust and believe that the ministry has a bit more information on me in terms of our stockpiles of petroleum. But I think it's a point that Terry mentioned, which is how much is it that's riding on this supply of oil that we have, right? Not only is it a main factor of production for everything in the economy, right? So, the farmer needs oil to get his produce, maybe to manufacture his to harvest his produce. He needs fuel to get it to the market, to Carrefour or to your Naivas. You need fuel. I need fuel to go and buy it, right? So generally, the impact of an increase in the price of fuel, as mentioned, through inflation and through the increase in the cost of living, is very likely. Also, when I say there's a lot riding on fuel, I think before we began, we were talking about the different commitments that the government has entered in relation to fuel. So we have this G2G, or government-to-government arrangement around oil. We also have the commitments it's made around the road maintenance fuel levy in terms of securitizing the revenues there, to issue debt instruments, right? So to commit to paying people in the future in order to finance stalled projects. So there's a lot riding on that supply of fuel. I was reading a Bloomberg article that was saying that Kenyan authorities are actually tracking a single tanker of fuel outside of the Strait of Hormuz, basically to Kenya, because that's how precious it is, right? So in the eventuality that the war goes on for beyond a month, I think that's when things will probably start biting, because at that point now the cheap oil that we have will have been exhausted, and now will be sort of fully exposed to the different effects of that. Of course, that could be moderated or kind of the extent of that could be affected by how quick we're able to maybe respond and get access fuel elsewhere. So like countries like Angola and Nigeria, I know the trade routes would be very weird. But actually getting oil through other channels, right? Whether it's instead of going through the Strait of Hormuz, somehow going around the Cape of Good Hope, I don't think that's really as feasible. But essentially, perhaps we'll be fine up until April. But from there, you probably, might see a repeat of 2023 where sort of a lot of things seem to be going in the wrong direction.
Yeah. You had a follow-up question?
I just had to breathe because he said like a lot of things are going to start spiraling. But the thing that's very interesting in this particular scenario is how you mentioned the G2G deal and the road maintenance levy.
Yeah.
Just like, could you paint a picture of what happens in case, like, especially with debt, considering every single thing we've seen over the last couple of weeks is every single government entity being, we're running away from debt, we don't want to accrue more debt. So how does this, like the accurate picture of like, will the road fuel maintenance levy go up? Or will it be completely removed to shield the people who are using it, especially if it rises too much too fast?
Yeah.
Is that going to change, or is the government just going to keep the burden purely on the consumer?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's an interesting scenario to play out from the perspective. So from the G2G agreement, so the G2G agreement was basically something that was devised, the National Treasury or government devised, basically a deal with the Saudi Arabian government, and I think UAE as well, the oil companies, basically to give an 180-day credit period within which Kenya didn't have to make any payments on its oil, and what they were trying to avoid is needing a lot of dollars in a short period of time, right? But that also depended on the flow of oil from these countries, right? So if that was to stop, perhaps maybe the deal would be on pause. I don't see how, if the oil was flowing, we probably won't still. If the oil was not flowing, we probably still wouldn't owe as much in terms of the amount would just decrease. So that one, perhaps, there's not too much that will fall apart. And the road maintenance fuel levy one is interesting because essentially what the government did is, in 2025, if I'm not wrong, is they said out of every 25 bob of fuel that we collect as the levy, 7 of those will go towards kind of a special purpose vehicle. Now, this special purpose vehicle will have the rights to that 7 shillings. And that special purpose vehicle will issue debt instruments to investors and use that money that it gets when it's borrowed from investors to invest in stalled projects, right, that are there. But that's all dependent on government's collection of that levy, which is then dependent on people's consumption of fuel. So if fuel, shoots to, 200 bob or, whatever it could be, normally, depending on, because fuel is something that a lot of people need, people tend to be, it could be a balance of some people who can afford it would continue to consume, right? But a lot of people who couldn't afford that 200 might just decide to walk to work, or might just decide to take a mat, right? And so that would basically mean that the consumption of fuel will fall, and so that the amount the government collects will lower. Now, if that happens, you'd imagine that the government would either adjust that 7 shillings to be maybe 20 shillings, so that the 7 shillings that they're collecting, so that it compensates for the drop in consumption. Or perhaps the government would lengthen the timeline that it has to pay back investors, because I think it gave investors a 10-year period, like they'll be paid for 10 years. But ultimately, of course, the question is, as much as it's a special purpose vehicle or another sort of entity somewhere that owes the investors, what will it look like if that special purpose vehicle is not able to pay? Likely that will fall back on government as debt.
Fair enough. I want to bring in Dr. Minde.
Minde.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you for the correction, Minde.
Sure. Yeah.
From what Cuba is painting, I mean, looks like a grim picture that he's trying to paint about the future and the possibilities that might occur. But in your area of expertise, how best can we cushion ourselves as a region, East Africa, and even as a continent from what he's saying in the coming days?
I think most governments have this reserve and contingency plans that they have put in place over the years for Kenya. So says about until April, which is not so long far away. But also we also have what we call, I'm not an economist, but the dollar reserves, the ability to even purchase this oil in the first place. So most governments have up to, let's say, 3 to 6 month contingency plans that are aimed to caution the economy. But beyond that, I think it can be very difficult because, again, most of these countries are not oil importing countries, and so they'll really need this oil. So what therefore can we say Africa or Kenya do in this particular time? And of course, this is a larger question, not just to Kenya, but also the countries that are also going to experience the same pain, is to give room for more discussions. And I think Iran has been very strategic, and it knows its strategic leverage with the Strait of Hormuz. The United States has this military power which can bomb and decimate all these regions and cripple Iranian economy. But Iran has this leverage over the Strait of Hormuz, which on many occasions it has threatened to close. But I also look at this also in the larger international political context, to also involve China, for example, which is also something that we're not discussing enough. We saw yet another oil producing nation of Venezuela Similar things happened in January, where the leader was abducted and taken to the United States for criminal charges. And now the United States has taken over many of these oil fields and the production of oil in Venezuela. So I think now we are seeing some form of oil imperialism that is a worrying trend going forward, and countries will start to feel the pinch, because it's not just about countries that are importing this oil, but also countries that also depend on the export of this oil to sustain their economies.
Yes.
I remember a case, the case of the sanctions that have been imposed in Russia, for example. But most of European countries also suffered because they cannot really sell its produce to Russia. So there's that. It's almost like a two-edged sword, where you find that there's impact on both sides. So for Kenya and Africa, I think it's a dire situation, because we are, a majority of us are net
allow me to
importers.
interrupt you kindly, because I want to pick your mind on something quite interesting. This is a post by the African Union. They did release a statement in relation to this conflict. And also we saw Kenya's president, that is President William Ruto, also releasing a statement. But are these statements enough in relation to this conflict? Do they have an impact, tangible impact?
Well, this is what countries need to do. Statements are important to just state a position. And most, I think if you read in between the lines of the AU statement and that of Kenya, in diplomatic terms, we call it strategic ambiguity. So it's not necessarily taking any sides, but you can see some elements of maybe siding with Israel, but not outrightly. So it's a way countries need to shield themselves. In international relations, there's a theory called realism, for example, where they say that the strong will get what they want and the weak will suffer what they must. So that is a reality of global politics, and it's about power. So Kenya, the African Union understand this global matrix and global power dynamics, and I think those positions or statements that they've released is quite calculated and necessary at this particular moment.
All right.
I think my question is to the both of you. So, which specific trade routes will just kind of not disappear, but be very difficult to use? And are there possible ones that will emerge, especially within the continent, considering the uncertainty of this conflict?
Yeah, it's a great question, because it's asking the question of so what, or then what, right? So of course, anything that's close to the Strait of Hormuz or the Gulf there will be difficult, right? So any trade with those 5 countries, so Iran, Kuwait, Oman, UAE, Saudi Arabia, very difficult. In fact, if not impossible, as far as we can see. The other ones that are interesting is, of course, the Indian Ocean trade route. So trade with China and trade with India, right? So we saw, I think, one ship has already been struck, across while in Indian Ocean, right, in kind of open waters. And so that's quite problematic, because some of those countries we actually depend on for staples, right? So we import a lot of rice from, the likes of India and China, and wheat as well. And so we are quite dependent. So that could actually have a food security implication, right? But the silver lining, I would say, in a lot of this, and I'd also like to add on what Dr. Terry was saying, that this is a follow-up of a series of events, right, that have increasingly sort of put African markets, or made African markets a bit vulnerable, right? Or so if you talk about the tariffs, you talk about the decline in aid, USA, and things like that. So a lot of the lessons from a lot of these things and from the war itself is the idea of dependence, and I guess economic sovereignty, you could say. So how dependent or how independent is Kenya of, like you rightly, your question was, of a conflict in the Middle East, right? As much as these are big trading partners, how is it that African countries are able to be more independent, rely on each other more, right? So for example, a significant amount of trade, African trade, is still done in dollars, despite us having a Pan-African payments settlement system called PAPS that allows us to actually trade in each other's currencies, right? So as of now, when I'm exporting to Nigeria, I have to change my shillings to dollars and then dollars to naira, right? But using the Pan-African payment system, it can actually be direct. So Kenyan shillings to naira. And so I think exploring some of these trade markets and trade routes within Africa, even broader than East African region. So of course, what would be under the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement. So fulfilling some of those, I think the context is basically telling us that this is one of the things that we really need to push forward.
And to you, Daktari, what sectors of the East African economy, as we observe it right now, are likely to benefit from this? What sectors are just going to be, this has fallen apart, we're going to take some wins right now?
Well, I think it will be hard to say which ones. As the economist has really put it, oil is a key factor of many things in terms of production, manufacturing, and we are dependent on all this. So I'm trying to think of a sector that could be, because again, we also export most of our produce to the Middle East, so we're also going to surf on that front. So I'm trying to imagine of a sector that could benefit, and I'm finding it very difficult to find if there's one. And of course, the world also, if there's a stable world, a unstable world also impacts many of our lives in terms of risks, in terms of energy supplies and all that. So I think it has a net impact of destabilization more than benefit, if at all they are there.
Maybe I can.
Do you agree, Houghton?
Yeah, I think it's true. It's hard to cut it, especially for countries that oil is oil. But for countries that actually, and maybe Kenya is one of them, that actually have a big in commodities, right? So mining of gold, mining of silver, mining of precious metals. Something like gold and silver. So for example, countries like South Africa, perhaps Zimbabwe, or some of the countries down in the south that actually mine these precious metals. These are metals that increasingly investors are looking to as safe haven assets, right? So as opposed to putting your money in an MMF, you can put it in gold because gold is forever scarce, right? And so you've seen the price of gold, the price of silver just soar, this global uncertainty. And so countries that do export some of these commodities stand to benefit. I don't know how much of that would apply to Kenya's mining sector, because just also because of the increase in price of some of these things. The other one, of course, could be oil-producing nations within Africa. So Angola, I think I was seeing an analysis, Angola, Nigeria, and also South Africa, but more of those two because they're oil-producing, actually have the biggest upside from the war.
Because there are opportunities.
Yeah, because the price of crude could double. Now you're exporting 1,000 barrels, it's worth 2,000.
All right.
Right.
Yeah. Guys, I want us to shift gears again.
Okay.
And this goes to Daktari. Kenya positions itself as a regional diplomatic hub. Again, are there opportunities diplomatically for Kenya during these conflicts?
Well, of course, regionally, Kenya, of course, position itself as an arbiter piece, resolving conflict within the Horn of Africa and the region at large. But in terms of opportunities for Kenya, I always say, look, this is a conflict of big players. These are big powers fighting.
We are big players within Africa. Come on,
but I'm looking at it. I'm looking at it in pure international real politique. I don't think we play very minuscule role in this data. What can you say? We were discussing it before the show began, that you can take this is advanced technology where a missile can fly all the way from one country to the other, interballistic missile. We are yet to get there. So for me, I think this is still a war of global powers, and Africa and Kenya, we are just observers for now. That's why we take, to be very frank with you, that's why we look at it also in a very balanced and neutral perspective, because we understand how these things up. Because again, look, the Kenya in terms of global power politics and play, Kenya is often seen as leaning more to the United States. It was only last year, 2024, that Kenya was designated as a major NATO ally, which is a big way of saying that it is now a very close ally to the United States in terms of military strategy and the like. So you understand even how the Kenya positions itself on that particular strike. But in terms of the direct influence, look, probably South Africa is the one that has spoken of acting as an arbiter, and of course maybe Turkey and the like. But for Africa, I think we still look. The other day we saw these conflicts, the regional conflicts, we outsourced them to Qatar and the United States. So I'm looking at it and saying that, of course, I think we are really...
You're finding hard something to pinpoint. Fair enough. But before I loop in my colleague, matters economy, totally. There's no way as a region we can come together and just look for opportunities to hunt for during this hard period before just in position.
I mean, it's possible, but I think when it comes to regional integration, it's a difficult topic, because you even see, I think something was in the headlines recently that almost none of the East African countries were making contributions to the East African community body that governs the East African community. So I think the state of regional integration, the question is, can they come together first, and then can they come together on these issues? And I think it's a central challenge with economic integration in Africa, which is there has to be enough at stake for each of us to be able to now come together and put our differences aside and say that, that's what we want to do. Perhaps there may be more luck between Ethiopia, Uganda, and Kenya to basically see what it is that we can bring together. But to a certain extent, we're all in the same boat, maybe the exception of Kenya, because we are, and Ethiopia perhaps because we're not, also Ethiopia is sort of landlocked, but Kenya at least has a bit of a flexibility. So the question is if that would actually be possible.
You're sounding a wake-up call.
Yes, probably.
Yeah, okay.
I think this will go to you, Dr. What signs should at least Kenya or like the African continent look out for in the few coming weeks, and what should we be alert to diplomatically, and also just to the way you said, like to duck and cover, what kind of signs should we look out for so as not to either contribute to an exacerbation of the problems that we are probably already facing? Like what could that look like? What could that framework that protects the African continent or Kenya look like?
Yeah, before even I go to that particular direction, I think this current crisis has unearthed how there's been an erosion of what we call international norms. And, post 1945, the world had some form of semblance of global order, respect for certain global norms. Issues to do with sovereignty. You cannot go and attack another foreign country, respect of territorial borders, integrity. And then there's the question of the use of force. And we have some form of agreed principles that direct global order. And of course, I think in January, we saw the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said that there's been a rupture in this global order. So what we're experiencing now is a new, I don't know if it's a new global order, world order, that is, there's an absence of international law, for example. Of course, international law remains there, but its applications and adherence has been really diluted. And this also now begs the question, even now coming closer home, that even the decisions that are being made by our countries, the so-called sovereign countries like Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, whichever, to what extent can we say we are very autonomous in the decisions that we make? And one would therefore be reminded of now these global capitalist networks of production and all that is so much embedded that the implications of what happens in the Middle East, or the election of Donald Trump, or the election of a United States president, has an impact in our countries, in the decisions that are made. So going forward, how well can we really shield ourselves is, of course, it's still understanding and playing it, understanding the trajectories of the conflict. For example, Kenya, it must not make any provocative statements. We saw in 1998, Kenya and Tanzania were, culprits, or they faced the terrorism attacks. So all these are calculated international risks that many countries in the global south need to take, especially during this particular time. My colleague has spoken about the question of tariffs. I remember Donald Trump will one day say, this so and so country is not abiding to certain things, so we slap it 50% tariffs. So all these are effects that are a result of the decisions that countries make. So it is a complex time, very interesting times that we live in, where the whims and caprices of one individual really impact global futures as we might know it at the moment.
All right. Thank you so much, Daktari. Thank you so much, Cuba. We had only 40 minutes to unpack all this and bring the conversation closer home. But before we call it a wrap, and then Justin does her thing, there's something Justin is going to do, and please, you need to listen to what she says carefully.
Okay.
But before that, I just want to pick your mind on this, both of you. If this conflict escalates, continues, Iran is talking of 6 months to wage war and etc. What will the common mwananchi feel? Starting with you.
It will not be pretty from the perspective, and again, where I started, that a lot of these things have happened before, right? So if you consider what your life was like in 2023, that's likely what will happen, right? One, of course, the cost of living may increase because of all the factors we've mentioned, continue rise in the price of oil, continue rise in the cost of production through the imports that we take in. What we've seen in the past as well is that the central bank of Kenya will come in and raise interest rates because they're scared of inflation, normally a bit tighter than is actually needed. And so what will happen is that the cost of borrowing will also increase, which means that then businesses will not be able to produce as much, not be able to hire as many people. So there may be a few layoffs that would be expected. You may also find that certain public services that you're dependent upon would not necessarily be as available or be available in the quality that you expect or that you've experienced before, because one of the impacts is that if the Kenyan shilling depreciates or the dollar appreciates as a result of what we're seeing, our public debt obligations will likely rise, especially on an external debt. And that means that the government will have to pay out more in interest in terms of the revenue that it collects, almost on a monthly basis. So that's what happened in 2023, where our debt was increasing weekly without touching it. And so the amount of money available for other public services will decline. But all of that is to be caveated, or the major caveat there is it also depends on how Kenya chooses to respond, right? There's some things that we don't have control over. We don't have control over the price of fuel. But how it is that the government chooses to prioritize the existing revenue that it has, how we as citizens choose to show up to the moment, I think is what will actually determine the economic consequences.
Okay. What a picture. Dr.
I think it's a bleak, we are, as I've said, we are living in a very interesting period of our life. I always make a joke to my students that, we read, the World Wars, for example, and we think that it was very far away, and then came in the Cold War, and people lived through this, and people have lived through wars. And look, it's not long ago that we were living through a pandemic, 2020, 2021, global pandemic. So, and then now we are here where we're experiencing these wars in 2022, 23, actually, the Russia's invasion in Ukraine, the continuous wars that are happening in Gaza, and then now we're experiencing this conflict in the Middle East, which is we're living in quite unprecedented periods. So for me, I don't just look at it from Kenyan perspective. This is also the future of humanity, that yes, we might be speaking about economics, we might be speaking about politics, but I always say this, that this is what we call the sanctity of human life and human dignity.
Yeah.
People living in utter desperations in war, which is quite, we don't even remember the people of Gaza who, they are living in this constantly day in, day out. For us, we can maybe speculate about 2-3 months to come and all these things that come with this. So there's this contingency plan. Probably, who knows? Maybe we might also be facing the same fate, maybe in a few months to come, because if the war becomes more aggravated, then it might result to dire situations. So for me, just to join my colleague, I think we are facing a very bleak prospect in the few months to come.
All right, fair enough. I think we'll come to a close, but we are not yet done. We'll have another opportunity to have your final remarks in this matter. But before I have you go and explain things badly as you always do, I want to warn you guys and tell you that the NTSA has launched instant fines. It's now live. So while you're going back home, be careful. If you exceed some speed limits, you'll be fined. And you're given 7 days to pay that fine via KCB Bank within 7 days. So please be careful on the roads. I don't want to see your names on NTSA portal in Twitter. So speeding over the limit of 6 to 10 kilometers per hour, you'll be fined 500. Beyond 11 to 15 kilometers per hour, you'll be fined 3,000. Beyond 16 to 20 kilometers per hour, in the given limit, you'll be fined 10,000. Wear your seatbelts, or you'll be fined 500 Kenya shillings. Yes,
but this is what happens in Tanzania. So I'm wondering, it has just come to Kenya.
Now be careful. It's not.
But at least for us, we have a flat rate.
Flat rates. Be careful now. That particular issue is now live. Wow. You'll be fined instantly. Now, 8 minutes. Are they enough for you? 5.
I hope so.
Okay, do your thing. Over to you.
So it has been hell and high water as 50,000 Kenyans have been displaced and 43 people have actually lost their lives after Nairobi and various parts of the country experienced extremely heavy rain on Friday evening and through the weekend, as warned by the Meteorological Department a few weeks ago. Interpreting notes from the Meteorological Department may be very difficult and confusing due to all those circles and colors, but it even confuses, I think, the MP for Kapseret, but red should mean we are all in danger. Rain levels got up to 90 millimeters and up in certain areas, with the water levels dangerously rising and drowning cars. There are so many devastating videos of Kenyans holding hands just to cross Mombasa Road, and there were people who were being rescued from matatus using wooden poles on Kirinyaga Road, and many, many other people tweeted out that they were stuck and they were hoping for a response. Some Kenyans had to lean into the physical BBI, Building Bridges initiative, to get across flooded roads. But seriously, several Kenyans lost their lives, including homeless people who were seeking shelter in abandoned cars. Nairobi's history of flooding is well documented, especially in our Olympic training of people who have learned to jump over open sewers and flooded roads. In Migori and Homa Bay, the rivers burst their banks and a lot of houses were submerged, and even their markets were also submerged. This lady said it best regarding the reaction from their politically obsessed governor.
Huyu wanga anasema analinda ground na alindi pande yake, analinda kwingine. Mara anaenda Masaini huko analinda huko na huko hakuji, na hebu angalia venye tuko. Hii sio mara ya kwanza. Maji imejaa mara kadhaa na hajawahi kanyaga. Sasa mimi naomba tu huyo mama akipenda watu kama sisi akuje atusaidie sisi. Sisi tutaenda na maji. Akiona tu hivi ataona tu tutaenda na maji.
This has been exacerbated with the levees that were being constructed along the Vasondo Miriu. And because they were not completed, now it means that all the water that was supposed to be moving on the other end has been channeled towards this area.
In the capital, some people came to the defense of the Dimples in charge, including a lawyer hoping to become the MP for Westlands, asking, what did you want him to do? And I'll just ask, if 1 + 1 is 2, then why is the math on the safety of Kenyans not mapped out too? We need to have that figured out. The governor, upon being interviewed, gave a backstory about him and his Dimples growing up here, and that Nairobi had had so many problems since '92, and he was almost swept away too.
There is no quick fix for this city, Jeff. It is not possible. There's no quick fix.
Did you think the job would be this daunting?
I knew it.
You knew?
I mean, I was born in this city. A lot of what we're doing is catching up with how derelict it was from 1992. When multipartyism came in and KANU lost control of Nairobi, then let it go. That's why I'm struggling with the president to build classrooms. The city is growing. We're dealing with a generational infrastructure deficit. Drainage built for 500,000 people, you know. Planning, you know, and development control for a smaller city than we have today. But the reality is we can't just whine. We have to do it, Jeff. And we're doing it, and I'm up to it, and we'll do it.
So surviving a flood isn't easy, but casually accepting that you lived through it so everyone else has to live through it is callous. Kenyan lives have been lost, and I think that should be the biggest issue here. One of the things that stood out for me is his best defense was that they are working on it and people need to stop littering, because if you're littering, that means that you're going to be unsafe during floods. I'm not sure if he's ever walked in the Valley of the Shadow of OTC or downtown Nairobi in any way, but that commute is not for the weak, let alone people who are environmentally friendly pedestrians. Nairobi has a lot of intersecting problems. We can all agree. We have poor waste management, we have no storm drainages, we have poor urban planning, and constrained public transport systems. In Lavington, trees are branching out to the ground, and Karura is in tricky nosy right now to make way for NYS accommodation. So this means that all our problems discovered Ubuntu and they are working together against us. But the response from most, if not every single administration since has been very reactive. After the tragedies in 2024, there should have been a better emergency response from the government, but all they told us was rada jipe mwenyewe. So sending out emergency systems after floods is the kind of working backwards that this administration and fairly all the others have been known for. A better solution to this mess would have been to have alerts go out to schools and to people directly to their phones where they're at work, so that people could leave early before the rain starts. Nairobi also requires an estimated 25 billion to complete the overhaul in the country's drainage system. But it currently spends 1.5 billion to 1.8 billion, which creates a huge budget deficit. And that means there's more work to be done. But adding dustbins is just one part. We need more serious solutions so that this issue is resolved permanently. And speaking of things that need solutions, I don't know if you guys are aware, but the SHA system went offline a couple of days ago. Yeah, if you're not sick, congratulations. The Social Health Authority digital system went offline last week, and we could have blamed the sharks biting sea cables or Kenya Power, but even this failure is out of their transformer range. Optimus did not prime this blackout.
SHA states that it has received notification from their service provider indicating a major incident leading to significant system unavailability. The health authority further says following a critical system failure on March 1st, 2026, the SHA digital platform has experienced a downtime.
So the digital system, which is the key infrastructure for SHA, went offline like a dedicated ghoster, which affected pre-authorizations that patients need to access hospital services. If you're unfamiliar with pre-authorizations, it's when someone on the other side of SHA computers decides if your treatment is worth covering or if that compass is pointed to true no. So SHA's key reliance on the digital system cost Kenyans 104 billion Kenyan shillings. And it's already failing, like the drainage systems of this dimpled nation. And this current offline mess is adding to that tragedy. SHA has been in its trial and terror phase, which it has introduced to so many other struggling to access healthcare services. Even cancer patients had to strike. If you have system issues that are so bad that cancer patients have to show up for maandamano KPIs, you need a system overhaul. SHA's CEO, who was seen here experimenting with a healing crusade handwave, assured the public that they will resolve this issue and it's their top priority, and that they are fully mobilized to get to the root cause. While they try to find the root cause, someone who needs a root canal hopefully has the pre-authorization of a money tree. Hopefully, these systems have been fully restored because I haven't seen any update on this. But this disruption was likely caused by a missile that was making a quick stopover at a data center because we decided to ship our services abroad. And this digital ecosystem collapsing means that this issue will persist and like a lot of symptoms on patients. So we're moving on to Meta. You guys know Meta, the creators of Facebook and at least 2 other apps that your family is scrolling over and addicted to, and they're skipping while they're watching this video. So Meta have new smart AI glasses that are used to train their identification AI. For these glasses to identify what the user is seeing, they're using workers in Kenya. These workers have confessed to seeing the wearers in their most intimate moments. So I don't know if any of you has them right now. Please take them off. So maybe the AI stands for anakuona hivi, you know? Because the workers reported seeing footage of people in the bathroom, in their bedrooms, and even some of them saw full credit card numbers. And these glasses could really change what it means to be a back-end user. Because if I have to view you go for a number 2, I'm using your CVV too. So there are 7 million people who have bought these glasses, meaning that so many workers have access to someone's get ready with me as they go to the bathroom without that wearer's knowledge. Some people don't even know that the glasses are recording, and that's like a technically boomer thing to do, that you don't know what the technology you have is doing. But you will never catch old people with this problem because most old people are either just pointing at their chin or at their forehead, so you can never catch them sleeping, which I respect. The issue with smart AI tech is that AI is just some guy sitting through hours of footage, getting destroyed, getting their mental health destroyed. So that machine can learn, so like the machine can learn, that's a tree, that's a house, that's where the enemies of progress live, and other things that you learned in kindergarten when your teacher was teaching. So Meta is using the training data to add another feature called name tag, where you can identify strangers by their names, by their addresses, by their work. It's as long as that information is on a Meta platform, the AI glasses can pick it up. And these glasses are an expansion of hypersurveillance that is marketed as smart AI. Maybe I feel like thieves are onto something when they wear balaclavas, because these guys are sorted and they're trying to teach us how not to be so hyper-surveilled. And speaking of someone who would have really, really benefited from not being surveilled, I don't know if you guys saw this video over the weekend. There was a football fan who was caught red-handed, or should I say white-nosed, during a Newcastle game, snorting what appears to be cocaine on a live sports channel. And the editors had a grand time. They didn't even edit him out or anything. They were just following him and his friends as they were rejoicing in all that flour. So one man that was just one man living in the moment. He didn't care that cameras were around. He had a full packet out, which is very visible from the video, and was even sharing it with all his friends and like random strangers around him. So his face was so full of joy, and he was just white out to the high heavens. That's where he was. And I would say don't do drugs on live TV, but that guy did not give an ounce of care. So I hope you are out there without your meta glasses living your best life.
Yo, I don't know how Tom does this, but mimi utanigongesha hii town. The way you're explaining things, doing a terrible work. Guys, did you hear her?
That's a good one.
Oh, yeah? All right. Now, I want us to come to a wrap on this episode. But before I let you guys go, I just want to, in less than 30 seconds, pick your brains on, by the way, are there benefits of war? And are there any etiquettes, kwa vita? Are there benefits and are there etiquettes?
Of course, there's a principle called the just war theory and jus in bellum, jus ad bellum, how to fight in war. And this is codified in international law, but whether or not that is followed is up to interpretation at the moment. But benefits in war, of course, victors always find ways of gaining territory and, you know, so one of the biggest victories in war is gaining territory and land masses, yeah.
Yeah. Economy-wise, are there benefits?
It depends who you ask.
Yeah.
I think if you are in the business of making weapons, then if you're in the military industry, then you stand to gain a lot. If you're in the business of things that tend to be staples or things that people will always need, whether it's war or not, then you'll still continue to make money. But also if you happen to provide an alternative to anything that's already at risk. So if you already produce oil and you're not in the Strait of Hormuz, stand to gain. The other people who gain are creditors, so people who lend people money, because suddenly you can say, you know, you're looking very risky because of this war. So I can actually ask for more interest payments from you so I can make more money. So,
all right. Right. Houghton, thank you so much for making time for us.
thank you.
Quite invaluable. Daktari Minde, thank you so much for making time for us. Justin, what say you?
Please be safe out there. It's still raining. I don't know if you guys have bought speedboats, but whatever you need to do to get home safely, if you have to stay indoors a little bit and get home later, please do it, because it's a very treacherous time to be outside.
All right. And that was our time. Thank you so much, guys. And just a reminder, Africa Uncensored has produced 2 medical negligence stories. Please make time and go watch those documentaries. We have one titled Fatal Detour, produced by I, Mwege William, and Elijah Kanyi. And we have another one by Tracy Bonariri, Stolen Steps. Quite devastating stories, but it's worth telling these stories, and that is why Africa Uncensored does exist. My name is Mwege William. Thank you so much for your invaluable company. Thank you to each and everyone who made this podcast a success. Until next time, have a lovely time. Goodbye.